It's Sunday evening. You're sitting at your desk and everything is finally perfect. The right pen is within reach. The lighting is soft but clear. Your workspace is completely clean, maybe for the first time in weeks. The distractions are eliminated. Your phone is in another room. The browser tabs are closed. 3 hours of preparation have led to this moment. You're ready to start. Then a notification sounds from somewhere down the hall. Or the light shifts just slightly as the sun moves behind a cloud. Or you hear your neighbor's door close in the hallway. And in that instant, something inside you collapses. Not the motivation to continue, the ability to begin at all. The fragile architecture of readiness that took 3 hours to build disintegrates in 3 seconds. You'll try again tomorrow, you tell yourself, when you can start fresh. When the conditions can be perfect from the very beginning. The task remains untouched. And beneath the rational explanations you offer yourself about focus and timing, there's something else. A familiar weight. The quiet, corrosive certainty that you've failed again at something that seems effortless for everyone else. This moment, experienced alone at desks and kitchen tables across the world, isn't random. It isn't laziness. It isn't even procrastination in the traditional sense. It's a specific cognitive pattern that researchers have documented extensively, but that most people profoundly misunderstand. Psychologists call it dichotomous thinking, the mental framework where only two states exist: complete success or total failure, perfect conditions or impossible circumstances, all or nothing. And what makes this particularly devastating is that it doesn't feel like a thinking pattern, it feels like reality. It feels like the only reasonable response to a world that punishes anything less than excellence. But here's what transforms this from simple perfectionism into something far more complex. This pattern doesn't just affect your standards, it affects your ability to begin. While perfectionism pushes you to refine and improve, all or nothing thinking prevents you from starting at all. It's the difference between running a marathon and being unable to tie your shoes because the conditions aren't ideal for running. And the question that haunts anyone living inside this pattern is simple and impossible. If you can see what needs to be done, if you can envision it perfectly, if you genuinely want to do it, why can't you just start? In this video, we're examining the neuroscience and psychology of all or nothing thinking. We'll uncover the specific brain mechanisms that make imperfect conditions feel genuinely threatening, not just uncomfortable. We'll explore how this pattern forms during critical developmental periods and why it persists even when you consciously know it's limiting you. We'll look at what researchers call the initiation paradox, why beginning becomes exponentially harder than continuing. We'll examine the hidden intelligence within this pattern, the protective function it once served, and the devastating cost it extracts now. We'll explore the relationship between conditional love in childhood and cognitive rigidity in adulthood. And finally, we'll discuss not how to lower your standards, but how to rewire a neural pathway that currently prevents you from ever reaching those standards because it stops you from beginning at all. If you've ever prepared for hours only to abandon the task at the smallest disruption, if you've been called a perfectionist but know it's something different, if you can envision brilliant projects but find yourself unable to start them, if the gap between your potential and your output feels like a constant indictment, this is the explanation you've been searching for. This is the psychology of all or nothing thinking. Let's begin. Most people assume this pattern is about high standards. They see the abandoned projects, the elaborate preparation rituals, the last-minute cancellations, and they think, this person just cares too much about doing things perfectly. But that interpretation misses something fundamental. This isn't about the destination. It's about the act of departure. Research in cognitive neuroscience reveals something striking. Individuals with dichotomous thinking patterns show distinctly different brain activation when faced with the prospect of beginning a task under imperfect conditions. Studies published in journals like Cognitive, Affective, and Behavioral Neuroscience demonstrate increased activity in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, when circumstances deviate from an internalized template of acceptable. Picture what this looks like in brain imaging. When researchers show someone with all or nothing thinking an imperfect scenario, a task with missing information, a project with unclear parameters, specific regions light up on the scan. The amygdala, that small almond-shaped structure deep in the brain center, begins to glow brighter. Blood flow increases. Neural activity intensifies. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, your planning and decision-making center, shows heightened activation, working overtime to assess threat level and determine response. It's the same pattern you'd see if you showed someone a photo of an angry face or played them a sudden loud noise. The brain is responding to imperfect conditions the way it responds to danger. This isn't metaphorical anxiety. It's measurable neural activity in the same regions that activate when the brain perceives actual danger. The scan doesn't distinguish between "this task has unclear requirements" and "this situation threatens my safety." To the nervous system trained in all-or-nothing logic, they register identically. Think about what that means. Your nervous system isn't being dramatic when imperfect conditions feel impossible. It's responding to what it has learned to recognize as a genuine threat. The notification that disrupted your focus, the slightly wrong lighting, the missing piece of information you wanted before starting. These aren't minor inconveniences your mind is exaggerating. To a brain trained in all-or-nothing logic, they're red flags, warnings, evidence that proceeding will lead to the one outcome the system is designed to prevent: imperfect performance. The internal experience is specific. Before you begin anything, there's a mental rehearsal. Not just planning, but complete simulation. You play out the entire process from start to finish, scanning for variables, anticipating obstacles, preparing contingencies. Other people seem able to just start and figure things out as they go. You need the complete map before you take the first step. And the moment reality deviates from that internal script, the moment something unexpected occurs or a condition shifts, the entire framework collapses. Not bends, collapses. Researchers call cognitive rigidity. Not stubbornness or inflexibility in the personality sense, but a literal reduced capacity for mental flexibility when faced with ambiguity or imperfection. Studies in the Journal of Experimental Psychology measuring executive function show that all-or-nothing thinkers experience significantly higher cognitive load during task initiation compared to people with more flexible thinking patterns. The difference isn't the task itself, it's what the brain is doing simultaneously. Processing the task while constantly monitoring for deviations, maintaining the perfect internal template while attempting to execute in imperfect reality, holding the ideal and the actual in working memory at the same time and finding them incompatible. The exhaustion you feel isn't from doing the work. It's from this constant, invisible comparison. This is where the pattern truly lives, not in the moments of obvious failure, but in the thousands of micro-abandonments that happen before anyone else even knows you were trying. From the outside, this looks like self-sabotage. Friends and family see someone intelligent, capable, filled with potential, and inexplicably unable to follow through. They offer the logical solutions. Just start small, don't worry about perfection, progress over perfection. Done is better than perfect. And if you could follow that advice, you would. The assumption embedded in those well-meaning suggestions is that you're choosing this pattern, that you're overthinking something simple. But from the inside, the experience is completely different. It's not that you won't start imperfectly. It's that imperfect feels genuinely impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Like trying to speak a language you don't know or solve an equation without the formula. The gap between just begin and actually beginning isn't motivational, it's neurological. What people on the outside miss is the constant internal monitoring. You're not just experiencing the moment, you're simultaneously observing yourself experiencing it, evaluating whether you're doing it correctly, comparing your performance to an internalized standard and adjusting in real time. Psychologists call this metacognition, and while some degree of self-reflection is normal, all-or-nothing thinking transforms it into something relentless. You're never just doing. You're always watching yourself do, measuring whether the doing is acceptable and ready to abort the entire process if it isn't. This is why the advice to just try lands so poorly. It's not that you haven't thought of trying. It's that your definition of trying and their definition of trying are fundamentally different. To them, trying means making an attempt, even an imperfect one. To you, trying means creating conditions where success is possible. And if those conditions aren't present, Attempting anyway isn't trying, it's guaranteeing failure. You're not avoiding effort. You're avoiding the specific kind of failure that your nervous system has learned is intolerable. The real misunderstanding is this: people think you're afraid of imperfection, but you're not afraid of imperfect work. You're afraid of being seen by yourself or others in the act of performing imperfectly. The finished imperfect product is one thing. The process of imperfect creation is another entirely, because the process can't be hidden, edited, or explained away. It's visible evidence of your inadequacy in real time, and somewhere deep in the architecture of your nervous system, that visibility still feels dangerous. This isn't vanity. This isn't ego. This is a learned equation that once kept you safe. All or nothing thinking doesn't emerge randomly. Research published in developmental psychology shows strong correlations between early conditional regard environments and later dichotomous cognitive patterns. Conditional regard is a clinical term for a common experience: love, attention, approval, or safety that depends on performance. Not the healthy encouragement of effort, but the clear message that your worth is determined by your output. And here's what makes this particularly insidious. It doesn't require overtly abusive or neglectful environments. Often, it develops in families that would be considered functional, even loving. Parents who praised achievements enthusiastically, but responded to failures with disappointment or silence. Caregivers who themselves modeled all-or-nothing approaches to their own lives. Teachers who gave attention to perfect work and none to effort. Environments where the child learned, through thousands of small interactions, that they were valued for what they produced, not for who they were. The child's brain, exquisitely designed to detect patterns and ensure survival, draws the most logical conclusion possible. Perfect performance equals connection and safety. Imperfect performance equals rejection or abandonment. And once that equation is established, it generalizes. It spreads beyond the original context. The child whose parents only praised academic excellence might find themselves decades later unable to start exercising unless they can commit to a perfect routine. Unable to send a text message unless they can craft the perfect words. Unable to create unless every condition aligns flawlessly. Neuroscience research from institutions like Stanford and MIT helps explain why this pattern is so persistent. During critical developmental periods, the brain is establishing fundamental frameworks for interpreting reality and responding to challenges. These frameworks become what psychologists call schemas, deeply embedded patterns of thought and behavior that operate largely outside conscious awareness. When a schema forms around the belief that imperfect action leads to danger, the brain quite literally wires itself to avoid imperfect action, not as a choice, but as an automatic protective response. This is the devastating brilliance of the human nervous system. It adapts. A child who receives love only for perfection develops a brain that treats perfection as a survival requirement. The system isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as designed, protecting you from a threat that was once very real. The problem is that the threat has changed, but the protection system hasn't. You weren't born this way. You were trained this way. And recognizing that difference is where everything begins to shift. Here's what most people miss when they observe all-or-nothing thinking from the outside. The pattern doesn't just affect how you perform tasks. It affects your nervous system's baseline state. Research published in Frontiers in Psychology on executive function shows that individuals with rigid dichotomous thinking patterns maintain chronically elevated activity in brain regions associated with monitoring and error detection. Even at rest, even when not actively engaged in a task, the system is scanning, preparing, vigilant. This is why the exhaustion feels disproportionate to the actual work completed. You're not just tired from what you did. You're tired from the constant background process of threat assessment. Every decision point, every moment of action, carries the weight of potential failure. Your prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for planning and decision-making, is simultaneously trying to execute the task and defend against the possibility of imperfect execution. Physically, this shows up in specific ways. The slight tension in your chest before beginning something new. The way your breathing becomes shallow when conditions aren't ideal. The sudden fatigue that appears when you contemplate starting without complete preparation. These aren't separate anxiety symptoms. They're the somatic signature of a nervous system perceiving threat. Your body is preparing for danger, elevating cortisol, activating the sympathetic nervous system, redirecting resources toward protection instead of creation. What makes this mechanism particularly hidden is its intelligence. This isn't a random malfunction. Every part of this system serves a function. The constant monitoring, it's trying to prevent the pain of unexpected failure. The elaborate preparation, it's attempting to control enough variables to make success likely. The abandonment when conditions aren't perfect, it's protecting you from the experience your nervous system has learned to fear most. Trying your best and having it be insufficient. The pattern isn't the problem. The pattern is the solution to a problem that used to exist. Understanding that changes everything about how you relate to it. There's a specific kind of grief that comes with recognizing how much this pattern has cost you. Not the dramatic losses, those are visible enough, but the quiet ones. The project you never started because you couldn't commit to doing it perfectly. The relationship you ended prematurely because the first conflict shattered the illusion of perfection. The career opportunity you didn't pursue because you couldn't guarantee excellence from day one. The creative work that exists completely and brilliantly in your mind, but never makes it into reality because reality is imperfect by definition. Research on cognitive flexibility published in Clinical Psychology Review shows that all-or-nothing thinking creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. The pattern where repeated inability to act leads to the belief that action itself is pointless. But in this case, the helplessness isn't about ability. You're capable. The helplessness is about conditions. You've learned that without perfect circumstances, your capability is irrelevant. So you wait. For the right time, the right resources, the right internal state. And while you wait, life continues without you. The relationship cost is particularly severe. All-or-nothing thinking doesn't just affect tasks, it affects people. Partners who experience your withdrawal when they fail to meet unspoken standards. Friends who stop reaching out because your responses are either intensely engaged or completely absent. The inability to exist in the messy, imperfect middle ground where most human connection actually happens. You're either all in or completely out, and the people in your life can feel the impossibility of that binary. They can sense that they're being measured against a template they can't see and will inevitably fail to match. Professionally, the pattern creates a specific kind of paralysis. You're often the most qualified person in the room, the one with the clearest vision and the highest standards. But you're also the one who struggles most with ambiguity, with incomplete information, with the messiness of real-world implementation. While others move forward with partial data and imperfect plans, you're still waiting for conditions that will never arrive. The cost isn't just missed opportunities. It's the gradual, corrosive belief that everyone else possesses some fundamental ability to begin that you lack. The creative cost might be the most painful, because creativity requires exactly what all-or-nothing thinking prevents: experimentation, failure, iteration, the willingness to create badly in service of eventually creating well. The artist who destroys work that's 90% complete because 10% doesn't match their vision. The writer who deletes thousands of words because a single paragraph feels inadequate. The musician who practices in private for years but never performs because the performance might be imperfect. This isn't wasted potential. This is potential held hostage by a protection system that can't distinguish between past and present threat. All-or-nothing thinking creates a specific kind of relational dynamic that's often invisible until someone names it. In the beginning, you're intensely present, fully engaged. The other person feels seen, understood, valued. You bring your complete attention, your highest effort, your best self, and it feels extraordinary, to them and to you. But there's something hidden in that intensity, an unspoken condition. An expectation that if you're showing up perfectly, they should too. The first imperfection, and there's always a first imperfection because humans are imperfect, hits differently in all-or-nothing systems. What neurotypical individuals experience as a disappointment or minor conflict, you experience as evidence, proof that the entire relationship has failed. Not that this moment was imperfect, but that the relationship itself is fundamentally flawed. Because in dichotomous thinking, there's no space between perfect connection and completely wrong. Attachment theory, as developed by researchers like Mary Ainsworth and John Bowlby, helps explain this pattern. Studies in attachment and human development show that individuals with anxious or avoidant attachment styles, often developed in the same conditional regard environments that create all or nothing thinking, struggle with what's called object constancy. The ability to hold on to the knowledge that someone is fundamentally good and safe, even when they're currently frustrating or disappointing. In secure attachment, you can be angry at someone and still know you love them. In all or nothing thinking, anger feels like evidence that love was an illusion. The internal experience during relational rupture is specific. It's not just hurt or disappointment. It's a kind of collapse. The framework you built the relationship on, this person is perfect, this connection is different, this time it will work, disintegrates. And instead of adjusting the framework, instead of recognizing that imperfection doesn't negate value, the all-or-nothing system does what it's designed to do. Categorizes the entire relationship as failed and begins withdrawal. People on the receiving end of this pattern describe a particular kind of confusion. They make a normal human mistake, forget something, speak sharply, need space, and suddenly they're facing complete emotional withdrawal. Not proportional distance, but total absence. They can't figure out what they did that was so catastrophic. The answer is nothing catastrophic. They simply failed to maintain perfection. And in an all-or-nothing system, imperfection and catastrophe are the same thing. This pattern doesn't make you unlovable. It makes you difficult to stay close to. Because intimacy requires the ability to be disappointed and remain, to be hurt and not abandon, to see someone's flaws and choose them anyway. And all-or-nothing thinking struggles with anyway. It understands perfect and unacceptable, the vast territory in between, where actual human love exists, remains largely inaccessible. What other people don't see is the constant surveillance. You're never just in a moment. You're observing yourself in the moment, evaluating your performance in real time, comparing it to an internal standard, and ready to abort if you detect deviation. Psychologists call this hypervigilant metacognition, and it transforms every experience into a test you're simultaneously taking and grading. In conversation, you're not just speaking. You're monitoring whether you're speaking correctly, analyzing the other person's micro-expressions for evidence of their judgment, reviewing what you just said for potential errors, planning your next statement while pretending to listen. The actual exchange becomes secondary to the performance evaluation. And if you detect any sign that you're failing the test, a pause that's too long, a phrase that came out wrong, a topic that landed poorly, the internal alarm sounds. Abort, withdraw. Try again when conditions are better. This surveillance extends to physical sensations. All-or-nothing thinkers often develop what researchers in the field of interoception call interoceptive hyper-awareness, heightened attention to internal bodily states. Studies published in Biological Psychology show this isn't just being in tune with your body. It's a pattern of hypervigilant monitoring. You're acutely conscious of your heartbeat, your breathing, any tension or discomfort. And instead of experiencing these sensations neutrally, your mind interprets them as data about performance. Racing heart means you're anxious, which means you're failing at staying calm. Shallow breathing means you're stressed, which means you can't handle this. The body's natural responses to engagement become evidence of inadequacy. The thought patterns have a specific architecture. Rumination, the tendency to replay events repeatedly, analyzing what went wrong and how it could have been better. Catastrophizing, the automatic jump from small imperfection to total failure. Black and white thinking that turns "this moment was difficult" into "I'm fundamentally incapable." And perhaps most painfully, constant comparison, not just to others, but to an imagined version of yourself that exists in perfect conditions and performs flawlessly. What makes this particularly exhausting is that it never stops. Even in rest, even in moments that should be enjoyable, the surveillance continues. You're at dinner with friends, but monitoring whether you're being entertaining enough. You're on vacation, but evaluating whether you're relaxing correctly. You're trying to sleep, but analyzing whether you're falling asleep fast enough. The observer never takes a break. The evaluator never clocks out. This isn't overthinking. This is a nervous system that learned its survival depends on constant monitoring for potential failure. Here's where all-or-nothing thinking reveals its most devastating trap. The very thing you need to heal the pattern, experience with imperfect action, is the thing the pattern prevents you from obtaining. Neuroscience research on cognitive flexibility, including work published in Nature Reviews Neuroscience, shows that the brain develops tolerance for ambiguity and imperfection, primarily through exposure to ambiguous and imperfect situations. The neural pathways that allow for gradual progress, partial success, and learning through failure strengthen through use. But all-or-nothing thinking prevents that use. The logic becomes circular and inescapable. Your nervous system needs evidence that imperfect action is safe. But to gather that evidence, you'd have to take imperfect action, which your nervous system has learned is dangerous. So you wait for perfect conditions. But perfect conditions never arrive. So you never begin. So you never gather evidence. So the belief that imperfect action is dangerous remains unchallenged. The pattern reinforces itself through its own logic. This is what psychologists call a double bind. You need X, but X requires Y. But Y triggers the fear of X. You need to believe partial effort is acceptable, but accepting partial effort requires taking partial action, but taking partial action feels like guaranteeing the failure you're trying to avoid. There's no way through that doesn't involve tolerating the exact discomfort the system exists to prevent. The awareness paradox makes this even more complex. Once you understand the pattern, once you can see it operating in your life, there's a natural assumption that awareness should change behavior. And when it doesn't, when you can clearly identify the all-or-nothing thought and still feel paralyzed by it, you add a new layer of failure. Now you're not just failing at the task, you're failing at healing. You're doing all-or-nothing thinking about your all-or-nothing thinking. Research in cognitive behavioral psychology, particularly work by Aaron Beck and colleagues at the Beck Institute, shows why awareness alone isn't sufficient. This pattern isn't just cognitive. It's not just thoughts you can think differently. It's embedded in your nervous system as an automatic response. It has emotional components, physiological components, behavioral components. You can intellectually understand that progress, not perfection, makes sense while your amygdala is genuinely activating as if imperfect action is dangerous. The conscious understanding and the automatic response are operating in different systems, at different speeds, with different priorities. The trap tightens further when you consider the function the pattern still serves. As limiting as it is, all-or-nothing thinking provides something. Certainty. The certainty that if you don't try, you can't fail. The certainty that if conditions aren't perfect, you have an explanation for not succeeding. The certainty of familiar suffering over uncertain growth. Letting go of the pattern means tolerating profound uncertainty. And your nervous system, remember, was trained that uncertainty is dangerous. This isn't a failure of willpower or understanding. This is what happens when a learned protective response outlives the threat it was designed to address. There comes a moment in the all-or-nothing pattern that feels different from the thousands of moments before it. You're preparing again for something you've been meaning to start. The conditions are almost right. You're waiting for just one more thing to fall into place. And suddenly, you see it. Not as a reasonable response to circumstances, but as the pattern itself. You recognize that you're not waiting for perfect conditions. You're waiting for an impossibility. And that impossibility is protective. It keeps you from having to face the one thing the pattern was designed to prevent: imperfect performance. This recognition doesn't feel like relief. It feels like standing at the edge of something vast. Because if the problem isn't actually the conditions, if the problem is the requirement for perfect conditions, then waiting won't help. Preparing more won't help. Trying again tomorrow won't help. The only thing that will help is the exact thing that feels impossible. Beginning anyway. What shifts in this moment isn't the pattern itself, but your relationship to it. You stop experiencing it as truth and start experiencing it as mechanism. Not, I can't start because conditions aren't right, but my nervous system is generating the sensation that I can't start because it has learned to require perfect conditions. That difference between truth and mechanism creates the first space for something different. The recognition often comes with grief. Grief for all the time spent waiting, for the opportunities missed, for the version of yourself that exists in perfect conditions but has never gotten to actually live. But beneath the grief, there's something else, something that feels almost like relief. Because if this is a learned pattern, if it was created by experience, then it can be altered by experience, not erased. Learning doesn't work that way, but rewired gradually through the accumulation of new evidence. This is where the pattern stops being who you are and becomes something you do. A habit, deeply embedded, but still a habit. And habits, neuroscience shows us, can change. Not through force or willpower, but through practice, repetition, the slow accumulation of experiences that contradict the original learning. The recognition doesn't fix anything, but it makes fixing something possible. The path out of all or nothing thinking isn't about lowering your standards. That advice, however well-meaning, misses the point entirely. Your standards aren't the problem. The requirement that you meet those standards perfectly from the very beginning. That's the problem. What needs to change isn't what you're aiming for, but your ability to tolerate the gap between where you are and where you're going. Research on neuroplasticity, including groundbreaking work from neuroscientists like Michael Merzenich at UCSF, offers something crucial here. The brain doesn't learn through perfect performance. It learns through accumulated evidence. Every time you take imperfect action and survive in the nervous system sense, meaning nothing catastrophic occurs, you provide your brain with data that contradicts the original learning. Not once, not dramatically, but repeatedly, gradually, in small doses that the system can integrate without triggering complete defensive shutdown. This means redefining what counts as progress. In all or nothing thinking, progress means measurable advancement toward the goal. But in rewiring the pattern, progress means taking any action at all under imperfect conditions. The action doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to lead anywhere. It just has to happen, because the goal isn't completing the task. Not yet. The goal is teaching your nervous system that imperfect action is survivable. Here's the framework. Cognitive behavioral research suggests works most effectively. Separate beginning from completing. These are different neural processes, and all or nothing thinking conflates them. Beginning requires only the ability to tolerate ambiguity and imperfection for a short period. Completing requires sustained effort and refinement. When you treat them as the same thing, you make beginning impossible. Start tracking beginnings as their own success, independent of outcome. You don't have to finish. You just have to start. Recognize that discomfort is data, not danger. When you begin something under imperfect conditions, your nervous system will generate discomfort. Racing heart, shallow breathing, the urge to stop. This isn't your system malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as trained. Research by neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux on fear conditioning helps explain this. The amygdala doesn't easily distinguish between past and present threats. The discomfort is real. But discomfort and danger aren't the same thing. Learning to distinguish between the two is the core skill. You're not trying to eliminate the discomfort. You're trying to act while the discomfort is present. Accumulate evidence gradually. You won't believe imperfect action is safe after one experience. Your nervous system needs dozens, maybe hundreds of data points showing that imperfect performance doesn't lead to the catastrophic outcomes it fears. This isn't fast. It isn't linear. Some days you'll tolerate imperfection. Some days the pattern will win completely. Both are part of the process. The question isn't whether you can do it every time. It's whether you can do it more times than you did last month. Practice compassionate self-correction. Here's what research on behavior change, including work by Kristen Neff on self-compassion, shows. Self-criticism after imperfect action actually reinforces all or nothing patterns. It confirms the nervous system's belief that imperfect performance is dangerous. Look, even you agree. But self-compassion, acknowledging the difficulty, recognizing the courage it took to try, treating yourself as you would someone you love, creates the psychological safety needed for genuine risk-taking. This isn't about being soft on yourself. It's about being strategic. Criticism shuts the system down. Compassion keeps it open. Focus on process goals over outcome goals. Instead of measuring success by whether you completed the task perfectly, measure it by whether you engaged with the process at all. Did you begin even when conditions weren't ideal? Did you continue for 5 minutes instead of stopping immediately? Did you tolerate the discomfort of imperfection for longer than last time? These become the victories. The actual output is secondary to the practice of imperfect action. The timeline matters. Cognitive patterns that took years to establish don't rewire in weeks. You're not looking for transformation. You're looking for incremental shifts in your nervous system's baseline response to imperfection. Some months the shift will be barely detectable. Other times you'll notice you began something without 3 hours of preparation and only realized it later. That's what success looks like in this work. Forgetting to perform the pattern because you were too busy doing the thing. From that Sunday evening desk where everything was finally perfect but you couldn't begin, to this moment of recognition. This is the distance the pattern travels. Not from brokenness to wholeness, but from automatic response to conscious choice. From I can't to this is difficult but possible. From a nervous system trapped in protective mode to one learning, slowly, that imperfect action won't destroy you. The all-or-nothing pattern isn't your enemy. It's a part of you that learned to survive in conditions where perfection was genuinely necessary. It protected something real. But protection that never updates becomes a prison. And what you're learning now is that the threat has changed. The parent or teacher or environment that made perfection mandatory isn't here anymore. The only thing still enforcing that requirement is the system inside you that hasn't yet received the evidence it needs to stand down. That evidence comes from you, from each imperfect beginning, from each moment you tolerate the discomfort of not knowing if you're doing it right, from each experience of surviving what the pattern promised would destroy you. You're not fighting the pattern. You're slowly, carefully, showing it that the world it's protecting you from doesn't exist anymore. This work is humbling. There's no final victory, no moment when you've defeated the pattern completely. There are just increasing stretches where you notice you've been creating, connecting, living imperfectly, and the world didn't end. Where the gap between your potential and your output begins to close not because you lowered your standards, but because you learned to begin before you were ready. If this essay found you in the middle of your own waiting, for perfect conditions, for the right moment, for the certainty that you won't fail, I want you to know something. The person you're waiting to become, the one who can perform perfectly and therefore doesn't need to be afraid, doesn't exist. Not because you're inadequate, but because that's not how humans work. We're not perfected and then released into life. We're imperfect in motion, learning through failure, growing through mess. Your standards, your vision, your ability to see how things could be better, these are gifts. But they become weapons when you use them to prevent yourself from beginning. The world doesn't need your perfect offering. It needs your imperfect engagement, your half-finished attempts, your work in progress, your willingness to be visible in the act of becoming. If this resonated with something you've been living, share this video with someone who might understand. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is help each other feel less alone in patterns we thought were uniquely ours. And if you're ready to explore more about the psychology of being human, the parts that hurt and the parts that heal, subscribe to this channel. We're building a community of people willing to look honestly at how we work and how we might work differently. Leave a comment telling me, what's the project you've been waiting for perfect conditions to start? Not to commit to beginning it, just to name it, to make it visible. Sometimes that's enough to shift something. Your story might be the permission someone else needs to start their own imperfect beginning. You're allowed to begin before you're ready. You're allowed to try and fail. You're allowed to be imperfect in motion instead of perfect in waiting. The pattern will tell you otherwise. It will generate every sensation of danger, every rational reason to wait. That's its job. Your job is to begin anyway.